Hello, I'm Tam, the TamBoTC channel, and I want to leave you with this just in case. So I'm starting with this at the beginning. I want to say that if you like Cyberpunk, continue liking Cyberpunk, but don't share your opinions. You can share your opinions in a not nasty way. I've had people who have shown their egotistical with their opinions or rude, kind of like the typical school bully with name calling and such, and just generally being nasty. There are different ways you can share your opinions, and it would be best to, with a choice, ironically to what I'm going to talk about in this video, to how you go about things. This is real life, not a video game when it comes to that stuff. You don't think about whose mental health you're affecting. You don't think about any of that stuff. And if you do, then be considerate of other people and their feelings, and so on and so forth. I know I've had my rough times from time to time, but in the end, know that I don't genuinely want to hurt anybody or be nasty to them myself. But yeah, I think that's the best way to go off with this. And yeah, so let's get into this. I want this to be my final Cyberpunk video. Because I'm sick of talking about Cyberpunk. I truly am. It's getting tiring. It has been tiring. These last, technically, couple of years at this point have been exhausting with that freaking game and just some of the fans, not all of the fans, but some of the fans that have been impatient and just rude or whatever other things they've been doing. And yeah, it's been ridiculous and over the top and over exaggerated. But yeah, it feels at this point as annoying as that freaking whip your hair back and forth song. But let's get into freaking what I want to talk about. So I want to talk about the dialogue system and role playing. So role playing isn't just, I've talked about in this in the previous video, where role playing isn't just dedicated to the dialogue system and such. There is also in how the person plays the game and so on. There's elements to this that I will be getting to shortly. And kind of like when you're given a class at the beginning of a game like Diablo with like Barbarian or Warlock or something, like that kind of thing. But you create your own way to play. Like maybe you want to play as a mage or a thief or an assassin or something, or a hunter, who knows? Like you kind of create it. Even maybe mix match different classes and make like a paladin mage. I don't know, something like that. And there's different things that like games provide you there, maybe even different races too, and their abilities that they add to things or contribute to things with the different powers and abilities they may have. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can roleplay. And dialogue can be a reflection of things too, whether you want to be a dickhead, or whether you want to be the nicest person, or like something like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, where it has the diplomacy option, which is like the middle ground basically between those two, where you're very neutral. And then there's the use of stuff like little words next to other words to symbolize what that is, like flirt next to something. Saying that this is flirt, you would hopefully let the dialogue speak for itself. I know that Starfield has this. In other games, you kind of let the dialogue speak for itself, or they do have other things, like they tell you you have a Thieves Guild option or Dark Brotherhood option, like in Skyrim, depending on if you join them. But you can technically kill the leader of the Dark Brotherhood and then never become a member of the Dark Brotherhood, or just ignore them altogether. And then there's, let's see, we got dialogue that might be color-coded with certain colors to reflect what that dialogue option means. You know how sometimes Mass Effect will have Renegade or Paragon, but that doesn't happen all the time. It is only some of the time, and during more important moments. There's also sometimes a time limit given to dialogue options, kind of like what The Witcher will sometimes do, or a Walking Dead game, or one of those Telltale games in general. And then there's symbols next to the dialogue. Now, Cyberpunk does a lot of this stuff, pretty much all of it. They're also color coding in other ways, like to tell you how difficult a dialogue option may be to perceive. It's something, and when it comes to how you role play your character in a game, like say we take any one of the Bethesda games, and I want to role play as a Shadow Scale, which is specifically a Argonian Dark Brotherhood assassin, or I want to be and most of the time you're going to be Dragonborn Shadow Scale, Dragonborn Hunter, Dragonborn Warrior. So Dragonborn is sadly the thing you do kind of have attached to all of those, but still, it is cool that you have the other options. And how you play, where maybe the dialogue suffers there, but role-playing isn't just in the dialogue, remember that. There's also effects to the world, like maybe during the Civil War in that game, you see the effects it takes on the cities during the war. Like, the cities will be wrecked and completely, like, destroyed in areas, as well as the guards will be changed to that faction of whoever wins, as well as the whatever people are patrolling the world and random encounters and such, whoever is hostile or non-hostile to you may change or differ too, and their interactions in general with you. So there's that too to think about. So there's still there's like the effects, and then like Fallout 4, you have the, like what you choose as a faction. Factions are a big point to the game too. I kind of think Cyberpunk needs factions and stuff to make its lore and just those gangs and other corporations stand out, because otherwise they're just there very briefly, and it kind of sucks. It's not enough world building that stands out, in my opinion, where the game is mostly specified to you not only role-playing as V, as what Hackman has talked about, but most of the dialogue heavily relates to specific things, such as talking crap about Arasaka or something about Johnny Silverhand or whatever. Maybe sometimes there'll be personal things with characters like Judy and such, but otherwise, most of the stuff you can play through most of those quest lines, and it'll have specific characters that you meet pretty much every time. So it's specified to V. It's not like you can meet whoever you want. And then there's like shopkeepers and police. You have different interactions with them. I don't think that Cyberpunk has the same level of interactions as they do, as well as random conversations as they do. Even Skyrim still has a lot of this stuff more so. And that game came out back in 2011. When it comes to the dialogue system, there's a lot of like, okay, let's talk first. I wanted to actually come back to how you play the game. Like, say I want to be a space cowboy in Starfield. You can do that. You got the clothing options and the weapons and the perks that help to do that. Or say in Fallout, I want to be this Silver Shroud. The game not only gives you dialogue to reflect that, but also the outfit and weapons to provide that. And you can kind of roleplay. You know those videos where it says, can you beat the game as so-and-so? Like Master Chief and stuff? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That is a form of role-playing. Now, because you're mostly role-playing as V with stuff, while you can do stuff outside of that does play to that role-playing factor, because of the previous elements I talked in my previous videos, where enemies are either in stationary positions, or you have to be involved in a main quest mission or side quest mission, and you have to be the one doing most of the aggro before anybody even notices you're there or wants to attack you. And because there's no random encounters or just gang and corporation members just walking willy-nilly around the street, or robots or drones flying around, or more air traffic of flying cars and stuff, it feels very empty and mediocre. Most of the civilians and even the shopkeepers don't really interact with you in a way that games like GTA and such do, where they actually attack back. Even Skyrim, they will attack back. Even though yes, it is silly that when you shoot at their feet or point your guns at them, they don't always react, though they have reflective dialogue of that stuff, which Ackman has also shared in his videos, especially the one on Cyberpunk, or ones on Cyberpunk or whatever. But yeah, it just, because of that stuff, it feels like role-playing as this or that, unless you're in the DLC, feels pointless, but we're not talking about the DLC. So it just kind of feels like it doesn't belong, and you can mostly do it within the boundaries of the scripted stuff. And then finally we come to the dialogue, which they're color coded, there's symbols, and then there's the words of like maybe corpo, nomad, or street kid or whatever next to it. It has pretty much everything going for it in that department. It's pretty much making a lot of the same mistakes people blame Bethesda games and such for, ironically. And most of the blue dialogue means this is just extra stuff to say, where the yellow dialogue means this progresses the story basically and the conversation. So just click this if you want to skip all that other stuff. Sometimes there'll be parts where there's 4 yellow dialogue options or there's a timer, but a lot of the time, unless it's specific missions, which is also not a whole lot of the time, stuff like the street kid options and such really don't matter, and the color-codedness kind of makes it feel very obvious in what it's trying to do. Where a lot of games either don't do either of these things, or they do some of these things. Take Fallout 4, which has the worst dialogue system in my opinion, unless you fix it with mods, which we shouldn't be relying on that for stuff. But take that for example, it does have a color-coded thing to it, but it's something similar to like when there's a different level to lockpicking something. It actually has somewhat a mechanic going on where it's trying to tell you this is more difficult, and there are effects like certain companions can technically die. Most of that stuff takes place during the end of the game, as well as there's the romances that include this stuff to think about too. So it'll give you different colors that they are obvious colors like yellow, green, red, orange, that kind of stuff to tell you the level of difficulty it is to actually pull it off. And then sometimes you get XP, or if you fail it, then okay. Sometimes it does mostly go the same way though, so that's where the problems do come in. But I can at least see they tried something. While there is trying going on in Cyberpunk, I feel like it somewhat tries less, or it tries to do too much at times, and it still goes the same direction that you're expecting it to go. With the foresight of the endings in the main game, and that you have to buy $30 DLC just to get the real endings and stuff, and probably the real gameplay experience, honestly, that the main game should be at this point. Who knows? I haven't really looked into that more. But still, I feel like people are going to spend more time with the DLC and such than they are with the main game, and even if they are, it's probably fooling around with the stuff they've been given from the DLC. And the DLC, once again, should not be doing the heavy lifting for the main game. I don't think the dialogue system is nearly as good. The other problem is that because of how scripted the game is, and that there is a lot of talking, I also wanted to bring this up, but take the anime, for example. When you line up the main characters or playing characters, the main players that you're seeing the most, and line them up next to the ones from the game, and line up the ones from the anime. As well as how the anime presents itself and how its story and such progresses. The anime has a lot more energy and personality, and even I would even say color to an extent, and the characters stand out more and ironically become more diverse. Even though there are diverse characters in the game, they're mostly by skin color and such, or size. Where I feel like the diversity of the characters in the anime are actually really good in their design and representation. There's a lot more energy going on, a lot more interesting, and even somewhat emotional story going on. And it kind of, in my opinion, makes the game look less, in my opinion. Now, the DLC might be doing a similar thing to that anime, but that main game isn't, and it feels less so for it. You got Johnny Silverhand, like you either got guys with robot hands, the same typical colored jacket with the freaking collar that glows, or you got Johnny Silverhand looking like he's a mix of frickin' Winter Soldier and the main character Far Cry Blood Dragon. It just doesn't feel like there's enough creativity going on there. And with something like, once again, with Mass Effect, when it comes to the colored dialogue, it only does it at certain points, and there are other points where it uses a timer thing with Renegade or Paragon. And not always can you unlock that. There is still a mechanical thing that you have to do in your leveling system in some of the Mass Effect games in order to be able to even say certain color-coded dialogue. So there are other things going on there, and they do a good job of pacing that out, where a lot of the dialogue is mostly just the same white color as everything else. You have to judge for yourself, reading that dialogue, as well as if the character is going to represent it right, what if that is what you want to say, and progress whether it's a romance or whatever. And then there's stuff like using symbols, which Cyberpunk also does use symbols once in a while for dialogue options. I've seen that almost yin and yang looking symbol next to some of the dialogue options. And then there's stuff like symbols in something like Mass Effect Andromeda or Dragon Age 2 and such, where it obviously shows you what symbol does what. And then sometimes even the dialogue in something like Andromeda doesn't reflect specifically what your character's going to say. Or they say a longer, lengthier version of that dialogue option. Or if it's a silent protagonist, it just rolls with that dialogue option and replies the way it probably should be in compliance to that. So there's many different ways there. Just know that dialogue isn't always the biggest part of the role-playing elements that the game has. There are other elements going on there. And there's also elements in which the world should be interacting with you on that level too. And since the previous things I mentioned with how empty the world is and how things are programmed and such in the world of Cyberpunk, as well as what other YouTubers have shared, such as Manly Reviews Ackman and Beat'em-Ups and L321, it contributes to the problem of why the role-playing doesn't work quite as strong, and I still feel that way. They will probably eventually get to the updates that do bring a lot of this stuff to fruition, but we do know that they'll probably never change the story because they think it's probably perfect at this point. But I personally think it still has a lot of these same problems that I have shared here. And another thing I wanted to actually talk about was another comparison to, say, Ubisoft open worlds. Like, another thing there was one more thing I wanted to talk about, actually, but I keep forgetting it for some reason. It was a really good point. I just keep slipping my goddamn mind for some reason. I'll come up with it. I'm going to make sure I record it next time. Yeah, but for now, I want to leave off with this, but I was comparing to some Ubisoft open worlds. I hate how bloated or big Ubisoft open worlds, as well as traversing Ubisoft open worlds, but there is something that Ubisoft open worlds do sometimes have, other than like the goddamn clutter and stuff, which Cyberpunk personally does have too, to an extent. But when it comes to it, their worlds at least have a lot of personality and interestingly art style designs and such to a lot of them. Not always. And sometimes they have that problem of being too big that it's overwhelming, and I feel like Cyberpunk can be that. And then there's traversing like through certain vehicles and stuff. I hate traversing in Assassin's Creed Odyssey because where in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, it was actually it was painless, it was actually fun. I don't know specifically what made it fun, but it was just a little bit more fun to traverse and do boat combat in that game. Where I feel like because of how big and bloated and not as fun with the boat controls and such, and probably even unfair, and just the level scaling is ridiculous, which I think Cyberpunk has some problems with that too. It's just not as fun to traverse the open world of something like Odyssey, and I feel like that same thing kind of bleeds over with Cyberpunk. But it still retains atmosphere, the really unique, cool art style with beautiful locations and stuff. Really, the only location maybe you could see the desert area, but the only location is like when you initially come out of your apartment building and you see all that cool stuff, which a lot of people are going to experience, honestly, where you see all those cool buildings even looking outside. It's cool for that moment, but once you realize all the stuff underneath the seams, it's just feels very empty. Even when it came to there are a lot of games you can still traverse, even Ubisoft games that you can still traverse without ever having to experience really a loading screen. and I still feel without a loading screen it can get affected. I have that with traversing the worlds of stuff like the Ghost Recon games or the Division games or Assassin's Creed games and such, and I still feel like there are a lot of times where traversing it without a single loading screen is freaking boring or has its problems because I don't like to traversal itself. So even those, I have had my share of problems ironically similar to what people have had to other certain games. So there's just a lot of irony and other ridiculous things that just come to mind every time I talk about this stuff, whether it be with Cyberpunk or whatever. And it's just got overbloated, ridiculous, and I wanted to talk about this stuff because of how it made me feel. And it is just my personal opinion at the end of the day. Take it lightly. And yeah, I think that's most of what I want to share here for this video. But know that there was something else I had to say, sadly, that I thought was really good that I brought out. Every time it comes up, because I do kind of rehearse what I'm going to say a lot of the time, but for some reason this one thing that I really liked, I forget to write it down or record it or something, and then it slips my mind and I forget it. One of these days it's gonna come out. It'll probably be a video called That One Thing I Forgot Was Really Important I Wanted to Say About Cyberpunk. So, we'll see. We will see. But that's for what I had to say there. I don't feel like a lot of the elements are that strong in Cyberpunk because the game has you sitting down and talking a lot, and it's a game I'm not nearly as personally invested in the dialogue and what the story has to say, because most of the story too is a lot of planning. Not really heists, but there is like one heist at least during the beginning of the game, but there's a lot of planning situations where it just feels very similar to the last thing. There are times you do have the options of going stealth or guns blazing, but you're still going the same way. You know that you still don't really accomplish much unless you play the DLC. Once again, the DLC has to do the heavy lifting. And the freaking endings in the main game freaking still suck. And is also sitting around and talking, or standing around and talking. So, yeah, I just sick of that stuff. It's overloaded with the amount of exposition and crap, even down to having the outdated stuff, like instead of you driving an NPC and hearing their dialogue, it's the other way around where you're being driven by an NPC and having to hear their exposition. So it's freaking ridiculous, and it does kind of affect the gameplay in that way. So, and there is a lot of it. There are some skippable parts of that, but others not so much. So yeah. And I think that some of that stuff does bleed into the DLC, but I don't know if it's nearly as much or intrusive as what the main game did. There's also, of course, parts where you have to follow NPC around, similar to that stuff people have talked about with other games, like Bethesda games. But yeah, I think that's all I have to talk about here, and I mostly stayed on the stationary screen, hoping that things came out well enough for you to hear and understand whatever they may be. Once again, keep the stuff I said at the beginning in mind throughout the video, and I will see you guys next time. I hope you have an awesome day, awesome night, wherever you live. Stay cool, stay frosty, and you have an awesome day. I don't know. If you did enjoy this or find something interesting or whatever, do remember to like, share, and subscribe. Leave your comments below, and I will see you next time. I don't want to talk about Cyberpunk anymore, but I feel like there's going to be instances where I have to, or there's going to be a situation that's interesting involving Cyberpunk. Who knows? I don't want to talk about it anymore, though. And especially since a lot of the stuff I had to talk about feel negative. I don't think everybody wants to hear negative stuff, but that's just my feelings, and they happen to come out negatively. So you stay positive, unless you agree with the negativity. I don't know. Whatever. But I'll see you next time, and hopefully be streaming and doing happier, more positive videos than these ones. So, bye.